The day I moved into my new lakefront property was supposed to be quiet, peaceful, and filled with that satisfying feeling of starting fresh. The lake shimmered under the morning sun, the dock creaked softly in the breeze, and everything about the place promised calm. But peace doesn't last long when an HOA thinks it runs everything within a 5-mile radius. I hadn't even finished unloading the moving truck when I noticed 3 people walking down the gravel path toward me, clipboards in hand, matching polo shirts, and that unmistakable expression of self-importance plastered across their faces. Leading the charge was a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled hair and sunglasses that probably cost more than my truck tires. She didn't even bother to introduce herself before she started talking. "You can't park that there," she said, pointing to my truck. "And the lake access fee is due by the 1st of every month." I blinked, unsure whether she was joking. "Lake access fee," I repeated. "Ma'am, I think you're mistaken. I own this property, and the lake is part of my land." That made her laugh, a sharp, condescending sound. "Sweetheart, this lake belongs to the Pineview Estates HOA. You're welcome to use it if you pay the association dues. Everyone here does." Now, I had done my homework before buying this place. The lake, the docks, and a section of the surrounding land were all included in the deed. The previous owner had mentioned that some of the neighboring homes had docks extending into the water with long-term usage agreements, but the HOA had no actual jurisdiction over the lake itself. I took a deep breath, trying to stay polite. "That's funny," I said. "Because according to the county registry, the lake and the land under it belong to me. I can show you the paperwork." The woman crossed her arms, clearly not used to being challenged. "I don't think you understand how our community works," she said. "We manage all lake-related activities. You can't just come in here and start making changes. There are rules." Behind her, a tall man with a clipboard nodded aggressively, chiming in, "We've had this arrangement for years. Everyone knows the lake's part of the HOA." I set down the box I was holding and looked at them all, realizing this wasn't a misunderstanding. They genuinely believed they owned my lake. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice even, "but this isn't your lake. You're welcome to use it as long as your docks stay within their agreements, but you don't have any authority over it. I'm the legal owner now." That stopped them for a moment, but the woman quickly recovered. "We'll see about that," she snapped. "Expect a notice from the HOA board." With that, they marched back up the path, muttering to each other like they'd just encountered a wild animal that needed to be dealt with. I shook my head, half amused, half irritated. It was my first day here, and the HOA already thought they could push me around. By that evening, I found a bright orange notice taped to my front door. It read, "Official HOA warning: unauthorized use of community lake." I laughed out loud. They were serious. The notice claimed I was in violation of community guidelines by using association property without approval. It even threatened fines if I continued to trespass. I took a photo of it for documentation and poured myself a drink. Clearly, I was going to have to make things crystal clear for these people. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office with a copy of my deed and had them print a certified copy that clearly outlined the lake boundaries. The surveyor had drawn a perfect line around the lake, the dock area, and my shoreline, all within my ownership. There was no legal room for argument. Armed with paperwork, I decided to pay the HOA a friendly visit. When I showed up at their office, a small converted garage next to the community pool, the same woman was there, now sitting behind a desk labeled President. I knocked on the open door. "Good morning," I said, holding up the documents. I just wanted to clarify this so there's no confusion. She gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. If this is about the lake, she said, we've already spoken to our attorney. We're confident it's community property. I laid the certified deed on the table in front of her. Then your attorney didn't do much research, I said. Here's the county verified document stating the lake and its surrounding land belong to this parcel, my property. You can confirm with the county clerk if you like. She frowned, scanning the paper, her face tightening as the realization began to dawn on her. This can't be right, she muttered. The HOA's been managing that lake for years. Managing, maybe, I said, but not owning. Big difference. The man with the clipboard from earlier walked in mid-conversation, looking defensive. You can't just change the rules because you bought a house, he said. I turned to him. I didn't change anything. I just own what I paid for. The lake isn't yours, it never was. The only reason you've been managing it is because the previous owner allowed it informally. But I'm not that lenient. The room fell silent. I could see the gears turning in their heads. They'd gotten so used to acting like they owned everything that they'd forgotten to check whether they actually did. After a long pause, the woman finally spoke. Well, we'll need to verify this with our legal team, she said stiffly. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you didn't interfere with any HOA activities. I nodded slowly. Fair enough. But from now on, if anyone wants to use the lake or the docks, they'll need my permission, not yours. As I left, I could feel their eyes on my back, a mix of anger and disbelief radiating from the office. They weren't used to being told no, and I could tell this was far from over. Over the next few days, the tension in the neighborhood grew. Homeowners started approaching me privately, asking if it was true that I owned the lake. Some were nervous, others curious. A few even admitted they'd been paying lake fees to the HOA for years and wondered where that money had actually gone. I told them the truth: the HOA had no legal right to collect fees for the lake, and if they wanted to keep using their docks, we could arrange proper agreements. By the end of the week, I got another letter, this time less aggressive but full of legal jargon. The HOA requested clarification on my ownership and proposed a partnership to continue managing the lake for the benefit of the community. I almost laughed. They'd gone from threats to negotiation in less than a week. I wrote back politely, enclosing a copy of the certified deed and stating that any management would need to go through me directly. I wasn't interested in shutting the neighborhood out, I just wasn't going to let a bunch of clipboard warriors tell me what to do on my own property. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the sun dip behind the water, I felt a strange mix of amusement and satisfaction. The lake rippled gently under the fading light, and the docks, stretching from various yards, stood quietly in place. I knew the HOA wouldn't give up easily, they never do, but they were in for a surprise. The days of pretending they owned my lake were over. They wanted a fight over ownership, but all I needed was a piece of paper and the truth. And soon enough, they'd learn exactly who controlled the water they'd been claiming as their own. A few weeks passed after my first encounter with the HOA, and though I'd hoped things would quiet down, the opposite happened. It was like I had kicked over a hornet's nest. Every few days, I'd find new letters tucked under my door, each one more passive-aggressive than the last. They accused me of everything from unauthorized lake activity to disrupting community harmony. It was absurd. I wasn't doing anything but living on my own property. But then came the one that really made my blood boil: a formal warning stating that my lake privileges were temporarily suspended for non-payment of HOA fees. That was the last straw. I decided it was time to stop playing nice. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of voices near the water. When I stepped out onto my deck, I saw two men in bright HOA polos walking along the shoreline with clipboards and a tape measure. They were standing right in front of my dock, pointing toward the lake and jotting things down. "Can I help you?" I called out. One of them looked up, annoyed that I had interrupted his inspection. "We're conducting a compliance check," he said. "The HOA received reports of unapproved modifications to this dock." I laughed in disbelief. "You mean my dock, the one sitting on my property?" He didn't even flinch. "All docks connected to the lake must comply with HOA standards," he said flatly. "You'll need to submit an inspection fee and proof of authorization." I walked down to the edge of the water, stopping just a few feet from them. "Listen," I said slowly, "I don't know how many times I have to repeat this, but the lake isn't HOA property. You don't have any right to be out here measuring my dock. You're trespassing." The second guy looked uncertain, glancing at his partner, but the first one doubled down. "Sir, if you continue to interfere with HOA business, we'll have to escalate this." I couldn't help but grin. "Go ahead," I said. "Escalate it? Just make sure you tell whoever's in charge that you're threatening the legal owner of this lake." They left not long after that, but I knew they'd run straight back to their board. And I was right. That evening, the HOA president herself, Karen, as I had come to think of her, showed up at my door again. She didn't bother to knock softly this time. "We need to talk," she said, stepping right up to my porch as if she owned the place. "I've received multiple complaints about your behavior. The HOA is considering fines for non-compliance." I leaned against the porch railing, amused by her confidence. "Fines for what exactly existing on my property?" She ignored my sarcasm. "You're refusing to follow community guidelines. You've blocked members from accessing the water, and that's a violation." Now that made me laugh out loud. "You're accusing me of blocking access to my own lake?" I asked. "Karen, you can't keep pretending this is HOA territory. I have the deed, the survey, and the legal backing. You can't issue fines for something you don't own." Her expression hardened, her lips tightening into a thin line. "We'll see about that," she said, her tone dripping with arrogance. "Our attorney is reviewing this, and if you continue to interfere, we'll take action." I crossed my arms, meeting her glare. "Then your attorney can explain to the county why your board keeps trespassing and making fraudulent claims of ownership. I'm sure the sheriff will love to hear about that." She turned on her heel and stormed off, but I could tell from her stiff posture that she was furious. For her, this wasn't just about the lake, it was about control. The HOA had been running things their way for so long that the idea of someone standing up to them was unthinkable. The next day, I decided to take a little preventive measure. I contacted the local sheriff's office and explained the situation, including the multiple trespassing incidents. The deputy I spoke with was sympathetic and assured me they'd make a note of it. "You wouldn't believe how many complaints we get about HOAs trying to play law enforcement," he said. "You did the right thing calling us." Later that week, the HOA took their pettiness to a new level. I got another letter, this one hand-delivered, claiming that my dock would be temporarily closed pending inspection. It was almost comical at this point. I walked down to the water that afternoon, and sure enough, they had placed a laminated sign on my dock that read, "HOA property closed until further notice." I ripped it down and tossed it into the trash. They could post all the signs they wanted, but they couldn't change the truth. Still, I knew this was escalating faster than I expected. They weren't going to back down easily, and if I didn't make a firm stand soon, they'd just keep pushing. So I decided to push back harder. The next day, I called my attorney, a friend from my previous town who specialized in property law. After explaining everything, he laughed so hard I thought he might fall out of his chair. "You're kidding me," he said between laughs. "They actually posted signs on your dock when I confirmed," he said. "All right, send me copies of the deed and the photos of their notices. I'll draft something they can't ignore." 2 days later, I received a beautifully worded cease and desist letter on official letterhead. It laid out, in no uncertain terms, that the HOA had no ownership or authority over the lake, the docks, or any of the connected land. It warned that any further attempts to enforce rules or collect fees regarding the lake would be considered harassment and trespassing. I made copies, one for Karen, one for the HOA office, and one for the county records. Then, just for dramatic effect, I personally delivered Karen's copy. She opened the door, clearly surprised to see me standing there. "What do you want now?" she asked. I smiled and handed her the envelope. "Just a little something from my attorney," I said. "You might want to read it carefully before your next meeting." She took it, eyeing it suspiciously. "What is this?" "It's a formal notice," I said. "If you or your board step onto my property again or claim ownership of my lake, you'll be hearing from more than just me next time." I turned to leave, but I could hear her flipping through the pages, the silence stretching longer with every line she read. The following week was blissfully quiet. No letters, no notices, no angry visits. The HOA had gone radio silent, and for the first time since moving in, I could actually enjoy the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the gentle lap of water against the dock. I spent my mornings fishing, my afternoons fixing up the cabin, and my evenings sitting by the fire pit watching the sunset reflect off the lake. It was the peace I had been hoping for all along. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. HOAs don't like losing power, especially when it's to someone who doesn't bend to their rules. Sure enough, about 2 weeks later, the next move came. This time, they didn't send letters or show up in person. Instead, they tried to go behind my back. I got a call from a contractor who handled dock maintenance for several of the neighboring homes. "Hey," he said, sounding uneasy, "the HOA told me to start inspecting your dock for violations next week. Just wanted to check if that's legit." I thanked him for the heads up and told him not to worry about it. "You won't be inspecting my dock," I said. "But you might be getting a call from my attorney if they keep sending people here." He chuckled awkwardly. "Figured as much. I'll tell them I'm out." That confirmed it. They were still trying to assert authority over something they didn't own. They hadn't learned a thing. I sat on the porch that evening, the reflection of the moon rippling on the lake, and thought about how ridiculous this had become. They could threaten, lie, and bluff all they wanted, but I had something stronger: proof, patience, and the law on my side. And if they wanted to keep testing me, they'd soon find out just how powerless their so-called authority really was. By the time the 3rd month rolled around, it was clear that the HOA wasn't going to give up. They had gone quiet for a few weeks, but I knew that silence wasn't surrender it was planning. I was out on the lake one morning, fishing in the calm mist, when I noticed something odd. Down along the opposite shore, a few men in neon vests were gathered near one of the docks that technically extended over my property line. I recognized the HOA's vice president among them, pacing back and forth, pointing at the water and talking loudly into his phone. Curiosity got the better of me, so I rode closer, keeping just out of earshot. I could hear fragments of their conversation, words like control, fees, and restrictions. That was enough to tell me they were still scheming. I rowed back toward my side of the lake, already planning my next move. If they wanted to keep pretending they had power over this lake, it was time to show them who actually did. The following week, I started digging deeper into the records. The previous owner had mentioned something about old agreements that allowed certain residents to build docks on the lake. I went to the county recorder's office and pulled the files. Sure enough, there were dock permits, but they were all conditional and required renewal every 5 years. Most of them had expired months before I bought the property. Technically, every single one of those docks now stood on my land without valid permission. The irony made me laugh. They had spent weeks threatening me for violations, when in reality, their entire lakeside setup was illegal. That night, I drafted letters to each homeowner who had a dock, letting them know about the lapse in permits. I wasn't cruel about it. I made it clear I wasn't trying to kick anyone out. I simply wanted to formalize proper agreements so everyone could continue using the lake legally. But I made sure to include one important line: the Pineview Estates HOA is no longer authorized to represent or manage this property in any capacity. The reaction was swift. Within 2 days, my phone was ringing non-stop. Most of the homeowners were polite and cooperative. They hadn't realized their permits had expired. Some even thanked me for taking over because they were tired of dealing with the HOA. But then there was Karen. She called me late in the afternoon, her voice tight with fury. "You had no right to contact our residents," she snapped. "Those docks are under HOA management, and you're confusing people." I took a slow breath, savoring the moment. "Karen, those docks are on my land," I said calmly. "The HOA has no jurisdiction here, and the county records back me up. The permits expired before I even bought the property. I'm simply offering a legal way for your residents to keep using them." She huffed, clearly unprepared for that level of calm logic. "You can't just take over community property," she said. "It's not community property," I replied. "It's private property. And you've been acting like you own something you never did." She hung up without another word. I figured that would be the end of it, but the HOA's pride couldn't handle being outdone. A few days later, I came home to find several cars parked near the edge of my property. When I walked down to the lake, there they were: Karen, her vice president, and a handful of board members standing on one of the docks, pointing toward my house. As I got closer, I realized they had installed a new sign overnight: "Private dock, HOA use only." I had to laugh. They were doubling down even after being proven wrong. I walked up calmly. "You're trespassing," I said, holding up my phone. "And that sign is coming down right now." Karen turned to me, her face red with anger. "You can't keep us from using the lake," she barked. "We've managed this area for 20 years. I looked her dead in the eye. "You managed it illegally for 20 years. Big difference. That's when I decided to put an end to their fantasy once and for all. The next morning, I filed official notices with the county and the sheriff's office, stating that the HOA no longer had any rights to conduct business or enforcement related to the lake. Then I hired a crew to install locked gates at the entrance to each dock, giving access only to homeowners who had signed the new agreements. It wasn't about being spiteful, it was about establishing boundaries that should have existed long ago. When the crew showed up with tools and materials, it didn't take long for word to spread. By mid-afternoon, Karen and her board members had gathered again, watching from the road as the workers installed the locks. She started shouting from across the water, demanding that they stop. "You can't block our members' docks," she yelled. I smiled, waved, and shouted back, "They're not your docks anymore." Later that evening, just as the sun dipped behind the trees, I sat on my porch and watched the golden light reflect off the newly secured docks. The HOA had lost every inch of control they thought they had, and there was nothing they could do about it. Still, I expected some sort of retaliation, and sure enough, it came the next morning. I woke up to an email from the HOA board claiming they would be pursuing legal action against me for restricting community access. I forwarded the email straight to my attorney, who replied with a single line, "Let them try." A week later, the case never even made it past the clerk's desk. The county officials sided with me completely, confirming that the HOA had no ownership rights or authority over any part of my property or the lake. That ruling effectively ended their campaign of intimidation for good. What happened next was almost poetic. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, and more homeowners started questioning the HOA's legitimacy. Some discovered that the board had been charging fees and fines that weren't legally enforceable. A few even demanded refunds. Within a month, the HOA's structure started to crumble. Their meetings grew smaller, their influence faded, and eventually, the board resigned one by one. Karen held out the longest, but even she couldn't withstand the pressure once the truth was public. By the end of the summer, Pineview Estates HOA was dissolved entirely. The neighborhood reorganized into a voluntary community association, one without the power to fine or control anyone. I didn't celebrate with fireworks or speeches. Instead, I enjoyed the quiet satisfaction of sitting by the lake one evening, the water perfectly still, the sound of crickets echoing in the distance. The docks were now properly permitted, the homeowners happy, and the constant stream of HOA nonsense had finally stopped. Every once in a while, I'd catch myself thinking back to that first day, when Karen had strutted up my driveway demanding fees for a lake she didn't own. I couldn't help but smile at how far things had come. Power built on arrogance never lasts long, and she learned that the hard way. That fall, I hosted a small barbecue for the neighbors who had supported me through the mess. We sat around the fire pit, watching the reflection of the flames ripple across the lake. One of the older residents raised his glass and said, "Here's to the man who saved our lake from the clipboard queen." Everyone laughed, and I just nodded modestly. I hadn't set out to be anyone's hero. I just wanted peace and fairness. But it felt good knowing I'd restored both. The lake, once a symbol of division and control, had become what it was always meant to be, a shared space for everyone to enjoy, free from the grip of power-hungry people who mistook authority for ownership. As the fire crackled and the stars came out, I realized something simple but profound: sometimes, standing your ground isn't about revenge. It's about restoring balance. And on that quiet night by the water, balance had finally been restored.